First, I have to say a few brief words about the World Autism Organization, and we're proud to be working with the ARI on this project. The World Autism Organization was founded in around the year 2000. We had Autism Europe for many years and it worked very successfully, but we didn't have a sort of worldwide constituency to have a voice with the world, with the United Nations and places like that, World Health Organization. And we thought that is an important element of what we do, lobbying for the right sorts of services throughout the world. It was okay for us in Europe, but we're trying very hard to spread the word throughout the world and have members from all over the world, which we do now. It is a democratic organization. It is predominantly run by parents and people with autism. It is not controlled by medical practitioners or the World Health Organization or anything like that. So we are a voice, an advocate for people with autism and their families. Thank you. Now I'm going to say a little bit about aggression and my son. He was here this morning, but I put him on an aeroplane. He's gone back to Ireland now, to the farm where he lives. So he won't hear me saying these things about him. I'm embarrassed about it, but I thought this is potentially mainly for parents. And I'd speak as a parent on the problems that we had and some of the solutions we found and some of the solutions we didn't find. And I'll leave it at there. So first of all, his name is Jamie, and he was born in 1970, and he was a very good looking, of course, young fellow, very cheerful, very happy. When he was born almost 52 years ago, we thought he was bright, but in fact it was his autism which made him seem so. He actually was born a slightly amberish colour. And I thought, I wonder why my son is the only one who's got sunburn. But then we realised it was jaundice that he'd got. And this, of course, is fairly common with children who later on become autistic. He certainly was not aggressive. He was a bad sleeper. And in the early days of his existence, he used to get up in the night and decorate his room with a smelly brown material which he produced himself and smeared all over the walls. And every day we'd have to clean his paintings off the walls that he'd done. He reached most of his developmental targets, but his language was not good. We weren't aware that he had a problem, really. We thought there was odd things about him, but he would sing little bits of songs, but it was a tune he was interested in. He wasn't too fussed about the words. He went to play school, which he disliked intensely. Clearly something was wrong, but we didn't know what. And after a year in the assessment centre, a psychiatrist who knew what autism was came and saw him and immediately diagnosed him. That was on the 31st of May, 1974. We said, but he can't be autistic because he used to speak. And the psychiatrist said, no, he didn't speak. Often parents want to say their children have spoken, and they babble, and so they make it, they believe that it's words. And I thought, actually, I'll tell you what I thought. I thought, you stupid old woman. I know he was talking. He talked to the lady over the fence at the next garden. Every day they'd have little chats, and everyone knows it. But that was when I realized that doctors don't know a lot about autism, or they didn't in 1974 know very much at all. At 8, he was fine, developing slowly, but we realized his language wasn't what it should be. And he went to a special unit. But at the age of about 8, we started to see aggression and violent behavior. We thought it was because his grandmother had just died, and we went to the funeral service, and we thought at the time that it upset him, but it wasn't. He was upset for several years after that, if that was what the cause was. and he changed dramatically. We noticed the sort of things that other parents notice. Sameness is something they like, and if we move the clock and the vase and change places, he would go crackers about that. Sorry, that's my dog joining in. When we went for walks, one thing we had to do, we couldn't do a walk along the road or in the park or in the country. We walked a lot in the country and turn round and come back again. He would not return along the same route as he'd been on. It was a little quirk he had. So we had to develop walks that were frying pan shaped. So he could go a little bit at the beginning, and then round a big loop and come back to where he started. Otherwise, he would go berserk under these circumstances and cry and roll around on the ground and get very upset about it. We also had trouble with cutting his hair. It wasn't painful or anything, but on 2 occasions we came away from the barbers with one side of his head cut, the hair cut, and the other side left alone. After a couple of years, we realized that what the problem was that he didn't like the bit where it snips across the front of his forehead, across his fringe, because all little bits of hair fall down on his face. And so pain and touch are different senses, and the touch of this hair falling down his face was another thing which set him up, got him very upset. And so the poor barber cutting it, this boy would suddenly move about, and he was terrified he'd have his eye out doing that. So we developed a scheme whereby the barber would do this side, then do that side, and at the last second we'd clamp him down and go snip, 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 and that bit was done. So there was an answer to that little problem as well. He had a severe fear of dogs, and dogs loved him. If he was on the beach, he was like a dog magnet. All the dogs on the beach came to see him, and he was terrified of them. And the only time he wasn't terrified was when he was in a temper, and he'd go around pulling all their tails, and they didn't like that. But there was nothing available for us really that was autism specific. We had a program called operant conditioning, which is a sort of precursor of ABA, but it did have sort of negative inputs that we had to use as well. But old-fashioned, and it didn't seem to make a lot of difference, but it was all there was at the time in those days. Things got better. He was sleeping about 4 hours a night, and we managed, but we survived that first period of time. Then when he was about 8 or 9, he went to a Rudolf Steiner school and had a nice time there. They would certainly treat him very, very well indeed, but it wasn't really the real world. It was something different, but he was happy there. But then he started having temper tantrums and becoming aggressive and violent there. And so he was chucked out when he was 11. But by the age of 12, we parents in Sunderland had set up our own school. We raised the money, bought the building, converted it, and had all the staff. And so he came to this school, which opened with 12 students, and he was number 12, just getting in there. You might be interested to know that school still exists now, but it's rather different. We have many buildings all over the place, 2 organizations, we split into 2, and between us we employ about 1,300 staff. It's big business. If we wanted to take over the world, we probably could have done it, but really we're a group of parents still that run this, and we cannot feel that we are responsible for the children all over the country. Yeah, but it's still going, and we're very proud of that effort. I'm very proud of Sunderland for being so supportive to us. So he raised that, a lot of input from a lot of people, but it was done. Then when he was about 12, real aggression started kicking in. We'd heard before of children having an aggressive period when they're in their childhood, then getting better, and then taking off again. But we thought, no, Jamie won't do that. but he did very badly. And sometimes he would attack me for what I thought were no reasons, and we'd be walking in the street. But fortunately, I'd had a training in wrestling, and so quite often people would see these two adult males fighting in the street, but I would get him in a Chinese stranglehold, which sounds terrible, but it's okay. It just means he can't bite you if you're behind him with his arms sort of clamped like that. So this was often seen around the streets of Sunderland, but it would gradually calm down. Now, we don't know exactly what he was doing, but this, I think, is important. It seemed to me that he was doing it on purpose, that he was trying to instigate a fight, build up pressure between, build up stress. And when people are stressed, they produce endorphins, and it makes you feel good. And some people enjoy dangerous sports for that very same reason. But Jamie seemed to do this to us, and then we'd be sitting eating dinner, and he'd suddenly start stealing food from my plate, and I'd say, if I said anything, I'd have to be very cautious because it would build up. Then he'd spit on my food until I'd say something, and then he'd go crazy. He'd have a real wobbly, as we used to call it. And this would go on, then I had to clamp him again. This would go on for about 20 minutes. Then gradually he'd calm down, and then he'd appear friendly, as if he was sorry for this. But that was when he was most dangerous. You kept your hands away from his face at that time, otherwise you'd lose digits. And then afterwards, this would go on, then he'd stop, and he'd be lovely, very happy, very cheerful, smiling. Then 2 hours later, it would start again. And this happened regularly. And we think he was producing endorphins in this way, making him feel good. Now, the interesting thing is that this mechanism only works when there's a lot of testosterone in the system. And when are the periods of testosterone highest levels? Around the age of 7 or 8 and in the teens. They combine, they appear when you have growth spurts. So very often when we used to talk to parents, we would just sort of ask this, and it was the case that you got far more of this aggressive behavior at that age and that older age. And parents used to talk to me. Now, I'm not a doctor, but as a fellow parent, I thought I could talk to my other fellow parents as family friends and just discuss it. And they would often confirm that, yes, it's like this, but it means that children cannot grow forever. So it means that usually this form of aggression is over by the age of about 20. And whatever therapy you've been using at times gets the credit for it, whether it's ABA, pouring a tin of treacle over your head, or whatever it is. And if it stops the aggression, you think that's what's done it. So there are many things which may have done it. We don't know. We just try to stop the first phase of getting very aggressive so that he could get aggressive back and get this kick from doing it. Drugs, of course, we could try drugs, and the only one we really tried with Jamie was the endorphins have morphine-like activity. They're opioid peptides, large peptides. And so we did try the anti-opioid drug, naltrexone. Now, this had been used by people in the past, but it's a very difficult drug to get the dose right. And we were using very small doses indeed. And I remember a lady, I can't remember her name, she wrote a book about starving brains, and she was very hot on using this. But with the first day we used it, the treatment was incredible. Actually, the change, it was Jamie's day when he had his sort of review, and he was there in his suit, and he looked great, and he was coming around. He looked at everybody in turn, their faces, stared at them. He looked at his hands as if he'd never seen them before. I don't think he had seen them in this same way. And this is the killer. On the way home, Jamie was in the back of the car and he leaned forward and said, "Mummy," and sat back. He'd never said "mummy" in his life before, and he sat back. And I looked at my wife and we thought, no, as I imagine it, and he did it again. He said "mummy," and then sat back like that. The problem was that either he habituated to it or there are other reasons why the effects didn't last long. We used small doses, much smaller than other people did, but even they were probably too big. The problem is these are things we didn't know at the time, otherwise it could have been used differently. It has a half-life of 72 hours, which means that if you keep giving the doses they give for other disorders in every day, you're going to build up a huge thing and you get a totally different effect. It's like drinking alcohol. If you drink alcohol, you get cheerful and friendly and sociable. And if you drink more, you become aggressive and surly. And if you drink more than that, you relax so much that you fall over. It's dose dependent. It's not just a linear, the more you take, the better you go. But it hasn't been worked out how this can be exploited, really. But I'm just throwing it in case there's somebody out there who wants to check how it's getting on. But I should tell you that Jamie is now 52. He lives on a farm in Ireland and he works on the farm and does not a lot of work. He's very lazy, but I've just had a week with him and he's been fabulous the whole time. No aggression. The whole lot has gone on. I think it's just age. I think he comes through it. After the aggression phase, you tend to get depression to some extent in the early 20s. And then it seems to be that the other problems start disappearing, apart from the obsessionality, which, if anything, gets worse, it seems to be. But he's better now, and he's a lovely chap, and I'm very, very proud of him.